Good afternoon. Chairman Victorino Manalo, National Commission for Culture and the Arts of the Philippines. Chairman Regalado Trota Jose, National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Professor Ambet Ocampo. Distinguished scholars from institutions across Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia. Partners from the Newberry Library, Princeton University, and the University of Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Philippine Consulate General in Chicago, it is my great honor to welcome you all to this important symposium exploring Spanish colonialism in the Pacific, and in particular the Philippines' pivotal place in that global story. For a long time, the Philippines under the Spanish rule was regarded as a distant outpost, an afterthought in the grand narrative of global expansion. Yet, as this symposium reminds us, the Philippines was not at the margins of the early modern world. It was at its very crossroads. From Manila, ideas, peoples, and goods traveled between Asia, the Americas, and Europe, shaping a truly global exchange that continues to define us today. We commend and thank the Newberry Library for highlighting its rich Philippine holdings, which are invaluable resources for understanding the lived experiences of our ancestors under Spanish rule. These documents, maps, and manuscripts remind us that Philippines' history is not confined to our country. It is woven into the fabric of world history. To help us further appreciate the significance of this shared history, we are fortunate to be joined by a historian who has brought the Filipino past vividly to life for both scholars and the public, Professor Ambet R. Ocampo. Professor Ocampo's insights are especially meaningful for this symposium. His ability to connect archival discoveries with the lived experiences of Filipinos offers a vital perspective, one that bridges the academic and the human, the historical and the contemporary. Through his work, we are reminded that the study of colonial history is not merely about the past, but about how we understand identity, nationhood, and the enduring links between the Philippines and the wider world. He is among the Philippines' most respected historians and public intellectuals, currently serving as the Senator Hill Puyat Professor at the Ateneo de Manila University and Distinguished Professorial Lecturer at De La Salle University. His writings, which are insightful, accessible, and deeply researched, have made history engaging to countless Filipinos, reminding us that the past is never distant but continues to shape who we are today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming our keynote speaker, Professor Ambet R. Ocampo. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. When Christina asked me to give the keynote today, I wondered what are you going to tell scholars who are doing more research than I am. And she says, just talk about the Murillo Velarde map. And Mr. Padron already took it away from me, but I'm glad I'm not talking about it. So I was wondering what I wanted to talk about today. And I decided I would talk about ideas because we're talking about Philippine lives. So today I'm going to talk about inventing Philippine lives. I'm going to talk about a forger in the Philippines who forged 16th to 18th century manuscripts and had a career of over almost half a century until he was found out by the people here in the Newberry Library. So it's rather apt that we talk about him today. Um, I wanted to, when I was going to do the maps, I was reminded of this wonderful vestry cabinet in the San Agustin Church in Manila. It's dated to the mid 18th century, and they've dated it because there is a name on top that's carved, and it just gives us the name of an Augustinian friar named Antonio Mosso, who had this wonderful cabinet carved. And when I was looking at it, most people pass by, and that's what I keep telling my students. We go through life, we see things, but we do not notice them. So hundreds of people walk through this and never really look. But when you look at the drawers, there are scenes from 18th century life. So these are hunters. No, one person doing lowland Christian using a dog, and then this one using a bow and an arrow. So when you look at them, you actually see them hunting for deer, something that we don't even see anymore today. Then you have different kinds of ethnic peoples, no? Itas on the left, and then some other group on the right. There are people who are wrestling. So when I was thinking of this, it reminded me of the Velarde map again. We're talking about lives, and as Ricardo Padron told us, the Philippine scenes are the most important. And that's been the question. Did the Jesuit tell them, this is what I want on the map? Or did the artists actually put themselves or put the native in them? I'd like to think that they read the Philippine parts of Murillo Velarde's book, and this is what they put in it. So when you look at it, one of the things that makes me and my students wonder is when we think of modern Manila, it looks like some unknown little city. But in the 18th century, Manila was a nexus of trade, and there were so many different types of people, so which are represented there. And it's rather funny too that these people from Spanish Africa, who are called in Spanish Cafres, has become in the Philippines a mythological figure. It is a big black man who lives in a tree, and he can change shapes. It's used to scare little children so who don't want to eat or to sleep. But it brings up so many connections that we have to see. So like in this one, we have a Japanese on the right, and this reminded me of the Hasekura um, tour around Europe from 1613 to 1620. And this is rather something that has interested me for a long time because when I was in Japan, I went to an exhibit where they brought this painting in. It was a commemoration of the Hasekura voyage. And they showed in the Museum of Sendai the only handwritten letter from Mr. Hasekura, and it was written from Manila, from Luzon in 1619. So after this voyage of around 8 years, he's writing to his son and telling him, tell your mother that I'm on my way home. I'm here in Luzon, which is Manila, and I'm just buying omiyage. He's buying presents to bring home. And in the Sendai Museum, they actually have the presents. And when I looked at them, they're not, they were bought in the Philippines, but they're not Philippine made. It's a kris from Indonesia and a dagger from Ceylon. So I said, you're shopping in 18th century Manila. What was available there? He didn't buy any Philippine things. So when you look at the map again, you see different types of Chinese, from the guy on the right who's fresh out of the ship to the guy on the left who's already Hispanicized, probably Christianized already. So you see him in different kinds of clothing. But in that cabinet in San Agustin, you have Chinese, a water carrier, and this one I don't know what he's selling, but these are ambulant vendors. He showed us also this image from the Velarde map. So you have Philippine vices, no cockfighting, and then you have on the top a deer. So this is also represented in that cabinet, and you have the Ites, or the people of the mountains. So they are shown not only in the map, but in this wonderful piece of furniture. You also see here the products of the land, bamboo, papaya, jackfruit, no, all sorts of things. But here you look at the monkeys. So there are three monkeys, two are black, one is white. And in the cabinet, you see a person hunting a monkey. And when you look on the other side, it's somebody getting fruit from the tree. So it's something that I hope one of my students will study, but it shows you here people who are getting fruit from the tree, and then there's someone doing a monkey, the other one with a snake. So there was a mention of the snake, and you have it here again near a house, and then it's in the cabinet again. It's a snake that eats the pig, but this one eats a human. So you also see the primary beast of burden, the carabao, on the cabinet, and then you have someone planting, in a rice field. So it's quite interesting to see how you can connect two things that are not really connected, but one has to see and one has to notice. 40 years ago, I took a course in the University of the Philippines on the 17th and 18th centuries. And my professor, Serafin D. Quiason, former National Library Director, who did the English country trade, was telling us that the 17th and 18th centuries are a lost history. But they're not exactly lost. They're there. And the people in this room actually prove that they're lying in plain sight. Our main problem in the Philippines, which has been mentioned earlier, is that Filipinos today are separated from their past because of language. So Spanish is the barrier that has to be bridged in order for us to get to know this early period. But the more difficult problem is the historiography that we grew up with. This is the late Teodoro Agoncillo, nationalist historian, who in the 1960s just declared there is no history of the Philippines before 1872. And when you look at his textbook, he was a friend, and he was very proud of it. He says, how many years was Spain in the Philippines? Almost 4 centuries. And he says, I put 400 years in one chapter. And then he says, the Philippine Revolution covers 12 chapters. So when you look at any Philippine history book, it's always focused on the last quarter of the 19th century. And this is why the 17th, 18th century is really not a lost history, but it is something that is lying in plain sight. So to explain it, I said, what happens to our real history? How can you say nothing happened before 1872? And Agoncillo framed it in this way, and he says, before 1872, the Filipinos have no agency. They are ship workers, they are servants, they do not have a voice in that history. So he says, what you have before 1872 is not Philippine history, but the history of Spain in the Philippines. And because this is the kind of thinking that we grew up, this is why it's very hard to get people not just to study the Spanish period, but also they have to throw out all this anti-colonial baggage. When I first came to the Newberry in 2000, I was on a Fulbright to do early Philippine anthropology. Going to the reading room, I saw Jose Rizal in the reference and bibliographic center. And when I came in, the librarians were saying, oh, it's Ambeto Campo, you're the guy who does Rizal. And they said, do you know that there are Rizal materials here? They brought some out in show and tell earlier. And I said, yes, I know it's here. Then they said, do you want to see it? No, I don't want to see it. And they said, why not? Because I know all of it already, so you don't have to show it to me. And then, so they kept asking, you really don't want to see it? I said, believe me, I know all these things about Rizal already. And it reminded me of one of my professors my supervisor used to say, never be very smug and think that you know everything, because there will always be an obscure German academic who has written it before you. So anyway, on my last day, after 3 months, somebody said, whether you like it or not, we'll bring it out for you to see. So first they brought out this medical notebook, Rizal's notebook, which probably they don't know. This was acquired from a scholar who was actually commissioned by the Philippine government to go all around the world and bring the things home. But Mr. Ayer had a better, bigger checkbook, so they were hijacked and came here. So the nice thing is that because they are here in the Newberry, they survived the 1945 battle for Manila. If they were there, then these things would have been lost. Anyway, Jose Rizal was a doctor. So I said, you know, I can tell you what's inside this book. Just open to a page and I'll tell you what's in it. And when I opened it, lo and behold, I was surprised because I only knew the text. In 1961, when they published all of Rizal's writings, they just published the text. There was the pictures, there's no reference to the pictures at all. And so this one, he's doing, studying a deceased breast. This one, he did a mastectomy. This one, he did a hair lip operation. Made me wonder. I thought he was an ophthalmologist, so why were there so many penises in it? And, um, and I realize now that this is why it was never published. They were very squeamish about the anatomical drawings in it. So the medical drawings were never published, and until today, they remain unpublished. So we only know the text, but not pictures, which shows you that you should always go back to an archive. Always look at the primary text. Do not rely on a transcription. You must see at least a good scan. Now, when we think about those anatomical drawings, it reminded me of an, Madame Picafetta account of Magellan's voyage. This is the 19th century English translation, which I always show to my students because it's one of the things that I'm famous for. One of their tests is that they have to read the Magellan document and Picafetta document, and there's a description of a penis implement. And because there's no drawing, it's just text. They have to draw the penis implement and tell me how it works. And so the kids are usually, well, the strange thing is that the females draw more detailed ones than the males. And there was one boy who says, you know, I don't want to do this quiz. And I said, why not? And he says, I have never drawn a penis in my life. And I said, well, there's always a first time, so do so. So anyway, when you think of the penis implement in Picafetta, in the English translation, it's not there. It's a whole paragraph describing it. And it just says, here follows an account of a custom. Look at Antonio de Morga, page 304. So they're letting you look at another book to look at this part. And so when I looked at it, so I looked for Morga, Stanley's translation. And lo and behold, this book also has an account of the penis implement. And when you look at it, it's translated into English, but the penis implement part is left completely in Spanish. So he did not remove it, but it cannot be read by an English-speaking reader. So when you look at this thing it's quite detailed. And I always tell my students, did Picafetta see this implement? And so they read it and they say, yes, he did. I said, no, read again. And Picafetta says, everyone told me that they use this, but nobody wanted to show it to me. So I said, how sure are we that this actually existed? It's in many 16th century documents. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that when Picafetta was in Cebu writing down word lists and talking about customs, there were probably two drunk Cebu people who said, let's invent something for this guy to write about. And so that's why it's all there. So when you look at it, then there's a long footnote about this is used to prevent the rapid increase of the population. So when you look at Jose Rizal's edition of the Morga, the text is there. But despite all of his long annotations, this text is left completely without comment. So what am I getting at? When you think about this implement, what did it look like? We only have the text, but in the Boxer Codex, on the margin, there is a drawing. So again, you have to find what these things are looking at. Now, why am I going into all these things? Um, I'm rather strange. In my spare time, I like reading old dictionaries. And when I was in college, one of my professors said that when people still use dictionaries, we would go to a bookstore and he would browse through the dictionaries. And I'd tell him, what are you looking for? And he says, you look for the bad words. And I said, why? He says, if the bad words aren't there, the dictionary isn't worth buying. So you must look for them all the time. So in my freshman year, I did a paper on bad words in Tagalog. And the text that was available to me was an 1860 edition of the Vocabulario de la Lengua Tagala. So when you look at it, you will see that the Philippine term, aso, perro, that's there, daga, raton. So there's always a translation. But lo and behold, when I looked at the anatomical term, otin is the penis, it's not translated. It's left in Latin, membrum virile. And then it says verbum inhonestum. It is a dishonest word. So as you can see, the dictionary already has a value judgment. Okay, natura hominis, kinalalakian. Lalaki is the term for man. And then it says that natura, otin again, of the man. And it says this is the biggest insult that you can tell them if you use it. So of course, I looked at the female, and then I saw the word puki. Again, it is left in Latin, pars verenda mulieris, verbum turpissimum, very dirty word. And so I was saying, why is this like this? So I looked at an earlier dictionary, and I found out that um, there was a term which people still use today in the Philippines. It means your mother's things. And so when my students see this, I say, look, this is 1794. You know, the cuss word you are using today has been there for 300 years. So and then there's another one which I hear, but I never understood what it was until I looked at the dictionaries. So when I looked at it, I found out that there were three different words for the same thing. So babae is a woman, but then there is a polite term for the female member. It's laman sa hati, meaning it's flesh that is cut in half. And then I found out that there's another one. Poki is for a maiden, and then Kiki is for a child. And then there's another one, Boa is for a deformed, ugly woman. So it shows you, depending on the term that you are using, it, it is very, very detailed. But today, we have children's books that give us the bad words. So we're not as squeamish as they are in the past. So the thing here is, when they were showing me the Rizal things again, um, I was again surprised. I said, I know the letter already. This is a letter where Rizal is talking to a man in Dresden called A.B. Meyer, and they're talking about hashish. And Rizal's talking about hashish, and its use in the Philippines. And what surprised me was he says, in 1879, I tried hashish. He was 18 years old. And he says, I bought it from the drugstore and I just wanted to experience it. So it emboldens my students to now try hashish because the national hero did so at 18 years old. So these things, this is A.B. Meyer, Rizal's friend. The letters that are in the Newberry are very interesting because they're talking of two things. Rizal read an ancient Chinese text that describes part of the Philippines as Mai. And Rizal says that's Luzon, and so he's telling this guy, what I think the place names in this ancient Chinese text are. But when you look even closer, there's another one where they're talking about the travels of Ibn Battuta, a place called Tawalisi. And Rizal says, that somebody says Ibn Battuta is like Gulliver's Travels. I don't believe that, I believe he went to the Philippines. And then he starts to find where Tawalisi is. And he thinks that Tawalisi was somewhere in the north of the Philippines. And so they think this is in Pangasinan. Now, if you read Ibn Battuta, this Tawalisi, there was a warrior princess called Urduja. And so this was created in the 50s by the National Heroes Commission. And I'll translate it. It says, Princess Urduja was a warrior and queen of Pangasinan, which is a province north of Manila, before the Spanish came. She spoke many languages, including Chinese, Arabic, and Sanskrit, and other native languages. She was the best warrior in the kingdom, and according to some writers, like Ibn Battuta, um, she she was in the Philippines sometime between 1347 and 1348. So because of this, it has spawned an industry. We have films, we have an animated series on her, and in Pangasinan, the governor's house is called Urduja House. But Urduja did not exist. So Rizal invented it, and so the lesson of the day there is just because he is Jose Rizal does not mean that he is correct all the time. Now we go to the novels. Somebody I heard when we were in the show and tell were asking if they had a first edition of the Noli, simply because at auction recently one sold for 7 million pesos. So everyone now looks at the price rather than the artifact. He's best known for writing two novels, and they often forget that he actually published three books. It's the second book that many people do not read because it's not really a book by Rizal, it's a book that he annotated. It is his edition of the 1609 Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, which they brought out today for show and tell. When you put all his three books together, you realize that the Morga talked about the past. His first novel, The Noli Me Tangere, talked about the present, and El Filibusterismo was talking about the future. So he's very organized in that way, and this shows you when you look at the way in which he wrote and organized, his three books. His first novel was called a Tagalog novel, 1887, but by 1891 he calls it a Philippine novel. So in these things, I think I'm overreading, but you see him imagining the nation before it ever came to be. The Morga is interesting because the book is so rare. There are less than 50 in the universe, and the British Library had two. So Rizal said, I will go to the British Library and look it up. So when he went there, and this is what the British Library looked like in the 19th century, this is what it looked like when I was a student in SOAS. I'm very happy. It's been closed for many years, and now it has recently been reopened. Um, I look at these pictures and I remember it because I didn't finish my PhD because I said, I just give me 3 months to write my result thesis. And my supervisor insisted, you must go to the British Library. And so the next 2 years, I read and read and read and didn't finish. But I always tell my students, my real education was the 2 years I was reading here. But what was interesting in the old reading room was it was very difficult to get a library card. And when you went in, it's very quiet. People are shuffling, carrying their books. Twice a day, tourists were allowed inside. So for about 10 minutes, it became noisy. So people would go out, let's have a beer, come back when the tourists leave. And I wondered because all the tourists went to a particular desk, G7. So one day I asked the librarian, why do all the tourists go there and take their pictures? And then they said, Karl Marx sat there. So the next morning, I came in early and I grabbed G7. And as I was warming Marx's seat, I, I realized if they know where Karl Marx sat, they will know where Jose Rizal sat. So I went to the librarians. I said, you know where Karl Marx sat, right? Can you check if you can see where Rizal sat? And so they dug up and they found out the letter of introduction. They found out when his library card was issued in August of 1888. And when he claimed his library card, he had to sign that I declare that I am not under 21 years of age. He gave his name, gave his address, and they gave him his card. But the librarian said, unfortunately, we do not know where he sat. Then I was very disappointed. So the librarian just says, it starts from A1, A2, A3. So starting tomorrow, you just sit in A1, A2, A3, B1. And he says, in 3 months, you would have sat on all the chairs. So you would have sat on Rizal's chair, but you don't know which one it is. So the thing there was, okay, the next best thing is, why don't I look for the Morga? Remember, there was no photocopying machine, no smartphone. So he had to copy out the whole book by hand, annotate at night, come back the next morning and do it. So when I requested it, I found out that in Rizal's book, he says he copied out the book whose call number was C32F31. And when I requested the two Morgas, I saw one that had F31. So this was the exact same book that he had used. So I immediately opened it to look inside. Maybe he left a note for me. There was none. I touched it reverently and touched my head to become smarter. That did not work either. But when I opened it, this is the edition. It's not like the one they have in the Newberry. This is the edition that he used. And you can see here the coat of arms of Antonio de Morga. And again, just to connect it, there was a shipwreck found outside Manila in Batangas, and they found Morga's signet ring. So he was the captain of a flagship during a Dutch invasion. So the San Diego wreck, they found the signet ring and they find this. You connect two and two together. So Rizal says, Morga is an excellent book, but must know how to read between the lines. So he starts to read between the lines, copying. And so this was his edition of 1890. And when I went in, when, when Christina, the other Christina, invited me, I spent a day in the British Library, and I had actually forgotten that Rizal's edition was signed. Obviously, he probably gave it to somebody who sold it so that somebody removed his name. At least half of Rizal's signature is still there. So it's now in the British Library and it is actually an autographed copy. He did not stop with the Morga. He read all the Philippine sources that were available, and we know that he read Picafetta. So he was telling one of his friends, um, you must learn Italian so you can translate this into our languages. So because if you do this, it says people will know how we once lived before. And he says Italian is easy; it can be learned in a month. I don't think that. Well, he spoke a bit 8 languages. So in the Morga, which he copied, there's a text where he talks about the food in the Philippines, right? What they eat, how they dress, etc. And they eat carabao, they eat meat, they eat fish, and they say that they know that the food is good when it rots and when it stinks. So Morga in 1609 says Filipinos eat food that is rotten, and they know this is rotten because it stinks. Now, when you look at Rizal's text, the text is still there, but when you look in the bottom, there's a very long, angry footnote where he says, we don't eat that. That's bagoong. It's a fermented shrimp paste. So he says, this cannot be rotten. But, when you know what bagoong is, it's a fermented shrimp or fish paste, which means it's really rotten, and it really stinks. But what you see here is Rizal is explaining to someone in 1609, this is what we are. You understand us for what we are. So his footnotes, I forgot to put a picture. You will see there are sometimes where Morga is one sentence and the rest of the page is a footnote. And the reason why scholars don't read it is because he's very angry. So it is unfortunate that the scholars think that Rizal's edition is not scholarly enough, and ordinary people think it's too scholarly with too many footnotes. So when you read it, he's always angry, always explaining. And so therefore, when you think about it, Rizal did not write a history book. He actually annotated one. And why is it important? Because it is the first history of the Philippines from the point of view of a colonial. Um, it is the first history of the Philippines from a Filipino point of view. And actually, they have not seen anything else older than it in Southeast Asia. It's the first history of the Philippines or of a part of Southeast Asia from the point of view of the colonized. Rizal was all of 29 years old. And when you look at it again, he chose the Morga, and what he says there is that the Filipinos had their own culture when the Spanish arrived. And he says that actually the Spanish disrupted our development. And so what happens here is he was in search of the pre-Spanish Filipino. What were we like before Spain came and made us what we are? As a little aside from this, Rizal started his work on the Morga in 1888. Then he moved to Paris to print his book in 1890. He was there at exactly the same time when the Jack the Ripper murders were occurring. So if you look at the Jack the Ripper website, he used to be one of the suspects because he's there at the right time. Jack the Ripper killed with a scalpel. He was a doctor, so it sort of uh, makes him very, very much what people want him to be. But he was not the only one. There were other people who were studying, trying to find out what the pre-colonial Philippines was like. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera and another guy named Pedro Paterno. And just to show you how Rizal is like, they're talking about Bathala, one of the early gods of the Philippines. And they said, did Bathala disappear when the Spanish introduced Christianity? And so he was writing to a Austrian friend, pay no attention to this Pedro Paterno. And this is the letter. And he says, Paterno is a blah, 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 and then he says, I cannot find a word for him. He is so, so again, when you look at it, he's very catty, very funny, but what is important here is he used history as a weapon, and he wanted to show that the destiny of a nation can only be understood by looking at its past. So with that little introduction, I want to segue into another guy. So there are two Joses, Jose Rizal, national hero, and a man named Jose Marco, national forger. And I think it's important because this man gave us what we wanted to hear. In 1911, the Americans sent a memo, you must gather all the historical material you can and send them to Manila to the National Library so that we will be able to reconstruct the history of this country. So this was in 1911, and by 1912, which is recorded by 1913, they had received in the National Library 3 bark manuscripts written in the pre-colonial syllabary. So it was made in 3 bark, and the ink that was used was cuttlefish ink. And according to James Robertson, who was the director of the library, and much of his staff is also here in the Newberry, he says these are the only pre-colonial texts that he knows about. And he made such a big thing about it. And it was given by a young Filipino named Jose Marco. Now, they had to validate. Jose Marco was like an early 20th century Indiana Jones. He claimed that he went into a cave in the island of Negros, and inside the cave there was an idol with horns and lots of eyes. And so he says, I went in, it was dark, I grabbed one of the horns and ran out because I was scared. And when I got home, inside the horn were these 3 bark manuscripts. So James Robertson, the director of the library, and 2 people from Merton Miller from the Bureau of Science and Luther Parker from the Education Department, they went there in December of 1912. And the conclusion was there was no idol anywhere. And there was nothing in the cave. So they were thinking that maybe it's true and this man is not telling us the truth, so we cannot find the idol. But eventually, the report said that after we visited, in all probability, there was never any idol. And yet, Robertson, who was with them, actually believed it or wanted to believe it, and he sent the manuscripts to the United States, pictures of the manuscripts. So he says this is the greatest literary find ever found. It antedates the Spanish occupation. And he says, like Mexico, the Spanish, when they came to the Philippines, destroyed all existing culture, something that we know was not really true. And he says these are the only things that survived. Uh, and he sent them to the Panama Pacific International Exposition, and the only pictures we have of them, because these were destroyed in 1945, are here in the Newberry. And so these are the pictures. So you see they're written in the pre-colonial script. This is the clearest pictures that we have of them. Uh, this one even opens up like a fan. And so when Robertson sent this, he wanted to show pre-Spanish Philippines to an American audience. Now, by 1919, there was a special issue of the Philippine History Quarterly, and there was a scholar named Norberto Romualdez who studied the manuscripts and tried to decipher them. And his conclusion was that these were made during the Spanish period. They are not pre-colonial. But because against James Robertson, who's the guy who did the 55-volume Philippine Islands, you believe Robertson and not the Filipino guy. So they just threw out his doubts on the material. And so the manuscripts used to be displayed in the National Library until 1945 when they were destroyed. Emboldened by this, Marco started to write things. He wrote a history of Negros, and he started to donate more things and write about things. So in this magazine, he said that the early Filipinos had their own calendar and even had a drawing, very crude drawing. There are 12 months with 12 mythical characters. I mean, the drawing's rather bad, but we find an old picture of it, which is like that. And when it is redrawn, this is the ancient calendar and time, also written in ancient Philippine script. Now, there are two mythical animals in the bottom. And not content with that, he even created a map. So it is a very old map, again sent by Jose E. Marco, and it is supposed to have been done by Spaniard named Diego Lope Povedano, which was made in 1572. This, of course, we now know to be fake. But the thing here is that when they were destroyed during the war, James Robertson had copies, transcriptions of these manuscripts. They were found in Duke University by the University of Chicago Philippine Studies Program. So they started to transcribe. They worked on it. Yesterday, I was in the University of Chicago looking at their papers, and they actually published 3 of the fake material because they believed in Robertson. Now, Robertson was also interested in one of the manuscripts. He actually found a pre-colonial code. So it first appeared in 1913. Nobody minded it. Um, he donated the manuscript to the National Library in 1914. And Robertson delivered a paper in the Panama Pacific Historical Congress, Social Structure and Ideas of Law. And he gave what we now know and what used to be in our textbooks as known as the Code of Kalantiaw. Um, so there used to be a Kalantiaw shrine in Aklan, and if you go there, there's a historical marker. And in this marker, it tells us that there was a Datu Bendahara Kalantiaw who lived in Aklan, and in 1433, he created a code of punishments. Now, because of that, retiring Supreme Court justices were given what was called the Code of Kalantiaw, the Order of Kalantiaw, created by Ferdinand Marcos. And it's a very beautiful medal. So the breast star has, the scales of justice and the 10 commandments. The Philippine Navy had an old U.S. Navy boat. They renamed it into the Kalantiaw, which eventually sank. it was shipwrecked. But I want to let you go through, we won't go through all the 18 rules. They're very short, but I want to give you some idea of what this code was like and what was taught to us in school. So, number three, you shouldn't be excessively lustful. And if you are excessively lustful, the punishment is you will be made to swim in the river for 3 hours, which means that removes all sexual desire. But if you are still lustful after swimming for 3 hours, you will be beaten to death with thorns or lacerated with thorns for the second offense. The punishments are very strange. Putting a hand in boiling water, being beaten up, being tied to an anthill. Uh, the punishments are so outrageous, and yet we had to be proud of this because this is an old code that predates the Spanish um, colonization. Okay, number seven, we had capital punishment. You will be put to death if you kill an ancient tree. So there were tree huggers in 1433. You will be put to death if you kill a shark or a striped crocodile. I said, what is a striped crocodile? It must be a special one. And then they said, you will be put to death if you enter the houses of the chiefs without permission. I said, isn't that such a, the punishment is so severe for someone who just enters without permission. But you will be put to death if you shoot arrows at night at old men and old women, which means you can shoot at young men and young women, that's fine, or shoot at them in the daytime and it's okay. So when we look at that, why is it this? They had slavery. uh, if you burn the fields of a neighbor. Of course, that's bad. You will be enslaved if you steal the wives of the chief. Of course, that's also bad. But you will be enslaved if you keep an ill tempered dog that bites the chief. And so I said, what kind of person is Kalantiaw? So there's slavery for a short period, slavery for life. This is nice. If you have a beautiful daughter and you keep them from the chief, so you will be enslaved for life. Then there's beating for 1 day, beating for 2 days. Beaten for 2 days if you kill a mana. It's like an eagle, no? Beautiful bird. If you mock the dead, even today, that's bad. But you will be beaten if you tear documents belonging to the headman. So there was universal literacy. They had writing. Where is this? We don't know. But anyway, you will be beaten for 2 days if you sing while traveling at night. So when you ask yourself, why do we find these things so crazy? Okay, this is the last one I'll show. Um, you will be killed if you profane the sites where we worship. And they said, if you perform your necessities in these places, you will be burned. So when you go to the Philippines, you will find many do not urinate here. There's a punishment, or don't urinate here, there, and over there. But the thing here is, you laughed when you look at it. It's the first time you've heard about the Code of Kalantiaw. Why do you laugh? Because we can sense instinctively that something is wrong with this text. And yet, the big question I ask my students, why didn't the historians and anthropologists laugh? They didn't laugh because they wanted to believe it to be true. This is ancient Philippine civilization. So we just have to take it for what it is. But then this is it. I learn more from my students than I teach them. We declared this thing a forgery in 2004 when I became chair of the Historical Commission, which Ricky Jose now heads. And what I wanted to do, and this is the resolution, we just declared there is no historical basis. We should get this out of the textbooks, and I want to close the Kalantiaw Shrine, which I found out was established by an act of Congress. Therefore, I needed another act of Congress to close it. And to do so meant the representative from a clan will probably cut my agency's budget to one peso. So what happened? Let's just do it. So there were letters to the office of the president by someone actually called Herodotus, no, Ramos, the mayor of Batan, and it came with a whole slew of officious letters that asked, And look, they vehemently opposed and urgently requested the president to overturn what I had done. And they're not content with that. They actually said, we have historical material to show that Ambeto Campo is wrong. And so their authority was a 32-page document written by someone from the province. And worse, they said there were 6 PhDs that said Kalantiaw is real. Ambeto Campo doesn't have a PhD. And I said, you can have 6 million PhDs. If you say a stupid thing, it is still a stupid thing. But then, anyway, we got through it. But the thing that clinched this is when I was teaching it one day, I said, Kalantiaw is a name, and you can separate it. The honorific is Ka, and Lanchao is his name. And when I said this, there were two Chinese Filipino boys in the back who started to laugh uncontrollably. And I said, what's so funny? They just kept laughing and laughing. We had to send them to the infirmary because they couldn't breathe. And so I said, Kanchao is the Philippine word meaning to tease. Is that why it is funny? Then they said, no, that's not what it is. So the Chinese in class said, in Hokkien, ka means to bite, and lanjiao means testicles. So it means kalanchao is to bite the testicles. So when I went back to my office, I had to check it. So I opened Google and I found out it was worse. It meant to suck dick, you know. So when I looked at that, I realized it was a joke. And if you go to the island of Cebu, they have there's a bull testicle and penis soup that is called lanxiao. So I said, Marco left a joke and nobody got it because they just wanted to believe it to be real. So he had the last word. The thing that made him famous was this is the picture of Manila, Intramuros after the war, 1945. And as you will see, only San Agustin Church is left standing. Although I keep telling Chairman Manalo and Chairman Jose, you can still see that parts of the structures were still up. So if they had actually rebuilt or restored some of them, much of Intramuros structures would still be there, but they just bulldozed everything after the war. And this was the National Library after the war. Bombed out, much of its collection, the museum and the library destroyed. So this is Fred Egan and Edie Hester of the University of Chicago Philippine Studies Program. They published this fake document of 1572 in the journal Philippine Studies. So it just says, we found this in James Robertson's papers and we decided to talk about it. There was a guy named Mauro Garcia who was a bibliographer, expert on, he wrote a book on Philippine incunabula. And I found out later that he was also buying from Mr. Marco. And when you see the correspondence, every other week, Marco will send him, I have this document from the 17th century. I got this document. And then he says, you know, I don't believe you, but how come you find all of these nice things? And then he actually says, you know, you are unique. We should give you a medal for bringing all these wonderful things to us. And it's very sad because sometimes they would have a prize and Mr. Garcia will say, you know, my daughter's going to college and I have to buy this book, but I don't have enough money. Can we haggle and can you lower the price? So this man kept buying the manuscripts. And this is what I actually laughed when I saw this letter. He says, you know, this is too good to be true because it is not true. And yet he started to just buy all of these things to beat everything. And at the same time, the University of Chicago was being sent material. And the material, the University of Chicago was working here in the Newberry. And these were the things. Look at the prices, $17, $22. But look at these things. Text from 1640, 1603, 1659, 1578. So all these things were all created by Mr. Marco. And this is his handiwork. So when you look at, actually, when I look at it today, I wouldn't be fooled, right? But what I realize now is all the warning signals were there. All the bells and whistles were ringing. And yet they disabled it because they wanted these things to be real. So there, sometimes Marco would send not just the titles, he would actually describe the things. You know how many pages it is. This is wrapped in vellum. Where did I look at this? Number three, the certified copy of the archivist is dated 1639, 100 folio size sheets. So he's describing them and giving provenance. So the thing there is, when you look at it again, archival research is interesting. I love it so much, but it actually helps for us to stop sometimes and reflect on issues of authority. His last big deal was he did a series of works on a Filipino patriot named Father Jose Burgos, and this was bought by a collector named Luis Araneta, who wrote about it again in Philippine Studies. And this was the entire corpus. And this man was greater than Jose Rizal because he wrote on shells, he wrote on music, he wrote on sociology, archaeology. He even made a novel which is better than supposedly Rizal's Noli Me Tangere. This was published by a refereed journal. And when I looked at it, I just looked at it and I said, this one, 1860, Jacinto Zamora was a martyred priest. I said, I don't know anything he has ever written, but it's there. But the clincher was this: Beliefs and Customs of the Filipinos, 200 pages, annotated by Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Blumentritt, Manila, 1868 to 1869. Rizal was 7 years old in 1868. And then this one, The Fight of Religion Against Science, with annotations of Dr. Rizal, again, 1860. Rizal was born in 1861. So I said, is he annotating something that is old, or was this the date of Rizal's annotations? They should have asked the questions earlier. So eventually, when they read the text, because I only have about 5 minutes more, they found out that the writing for somebody who had 3 PhDs and was the smartest guy in 1872, they found out how come his Spanish is so rough and his data is wrong. So they were supposed to publish all of these documents, but the Jesuits in the Ateneo said, if we publish this, he will be exposed to ridicule. So let's not publish them anymore. And they stopped talking about it. And eventually they found out that it was all made by Jose Marco. But the thing here now is, not only did the scholars want to believe this to be real, but they actually hid data from each other. So one guy's buying manuscripts, not telling the other. And so we see this in the letters. Mr. Garcia saying collectors vied with one another. We had to obtain this by hook or by crook. And then he actually admits, I was not untainted with guilt. I wanted to buy all the things. So the eminent anthropologist of the Philippines, H. Otley Bayer, described Marco. He's strong scholarly in things, but he has to be handled with diplomacy, his statements accepted with caution. This is May 1954. And yet, this is a letter from 1955 from the deputy director of the Philippines University of Chicago Philippine Studies Program. And if you look at the last paragraph, they're trying to outbid Mr. Garcia. So if Mr. Garcia's negotiations for the Alcina album should fail and the National Library doesn't want it, please let me know. I think I could afford to pay personally, not from Chicago money, $36.45, which you priced in your letter. So they are buying on their own. So the point here is fakes and disinformation are not new. We had the Tasaday in the 1970s, no, Stone Age tribe. And then this one, just recently during the Magellan commemorations, uh, there, there was a panel that was set up by the Historical Commission to decide where the first Mass was heard. The Historical Commission declared the site, and then they were brought to court. So now historians have to be scared of libel if somebody doesn't like what your research is. So the point here is fake news and disinformation are as old as history. And when you look at this, in 2004, somebody dug up this 1934 unpublished document on the landing of Magellan, wrote about it, then it went into social media. So they were quoting from this text that was found in a very fantastic thing, found in a old building in the walled city, etc., and all these things um, ransacked from the British Museum. But when I looked at the magazine, in the editor's note, it actually says that it came from a guy named Eduardo Delete. He had a friend named Marco, and the latter's son is Jose Marco again. So if you only read the text and do not look at the editor's note, you will not know where it is. And then it says if the manuscript is authentic, then it. So they were already wondering. And yet, once published, it becomes history. So I'd like to think that Jose Marcos' continuing relevance remains because today we live in an age of historical distortion. And I'd like to think that historians like ourselves who go to the archive and try to combat and try to find truth will find in this man many things to inspire us to do the work that we do. So the search for origins, the work that you are doing, once it goes to the Philippines, it will go. You're talking about wax, you're talking about, place names. Tomorrow there'll be other panels. We're doing this for Latin American studies, for academic work, but when it goes to the Philippines, they put it in the frame of finding origins. They want the historical material to tell us about the Philippines, where we came from, where we are, and where we are going. And so we must look at the abuses and the uses of history. So Marco, I'd like to think, reminds us of what Caroline Howe calls necessary fictions. There have been two plays written about Marco, and in these two plays, which are very didactic, they always say, you wrecked Philippine historiography, you're a bad guy. And I keep telling my friends who write, my playwright friends, can you write a new play about Marco? And they said, what do you want? I want an Ambet Ocampo character in the play. And I want the Ambet Ocampo character to confront Marco and say, why did you do all of these fake things? And Marco will just say, you wanted the pre-colonial culture. There was none. So I made one for you. Is that a problem? You wanted to find a hero who was better than Jose Rizal. There was none. So I gave you the whole corpus of Jose Burgos. You think we don't know about the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries? So I created the whole corpus for you. And Marco will tell the Ambet Ocampo character, sometimes to be a Filipino, you have to believe things even if they are not real. And so this is the whole point of what history is, searching for truth, but imagining things is also part of our job. And I'd like to think Marco reminds us, as researchers in the archives, that sometimes we have to stop, think, and look at necessary fictions. Thank you and good evening.